Lightsabers are cool. When I was a kid and I had the chance to buy a Star Wars comic or get a Star Wars book from the library, I would sometimes make my choice based purely on whether or not there was a lightsaber on the cover. I would buy heavily discounted Phantom Menace accessory packs just so my Star Wars action figures would have more lightsabers to use. My friends and I built our own lightsabers out of plumbing supplies, and I got into VFX purely so I could learn how to rotoscope the blades. I owe, potentially, my entire career to thinking lightsabers are cool, so I'm just going to talk about them for a while. The first question we should ask about lightsabers is, where do they come from? Did George Lucas make them up on his own, or, like so many other elements of his sci-fi boomer nostalgia mixtape, did he pull the idea from somewhere else? The idea of including swords at all in a science fiction movie was probably inspired by Lucas's infatuation with Akira Kurosawa's films, with The Hidden Fortress serving as the basis for the earliest version of Star Wars' plot. But just having a regular metal sword in a universe with starships and laser guns wouldn't really make sense. So why not a sword where the blade itself was a laser beam? But of course, George Lucas wasn't the first person to find a way to include an ancient weapon in a futuristic setting. The earliest science fiction application of the concept seems to have been in the April 1933 issue of The Magic Carpet magazine, which featured a story by Edmund Hamilton, the husband of Empire Strikes Back screenwriter Lee Brackett, called Kaldar, World of Antares. In this story, the people of the planet Kaldar wielded light swords, rapier-like weapons that could be charged with additional energy to make them glow with destructive power. But these swords still had regular metal blades, and the light was an additional effect, so not exactly a weapon you can turn on and off like a flashlight. Next, the 1943 novel Gather Darkness by Fritz Leiber featured rods of wrath, truncheon-like objects that released blade-like beams of violet energy, though these weapons actually behaved more like light than lightsabers and extended indefinitely, carving into the walls of any room where a duel might take place. Then Isaac Asimov's Lucky Star series from the 1950s included force blades, which generated a 9-inch long blade that could cut through anything, but was invisible. None of these were exactly like lightsabers, but it's possible that Lucas had come across one or more of these stories and had them bouncing around in the back of his head when he started writing his own science fiction epic. The first mention of a laser sword in Star Wars was in Lucas's May 1973 story synopsis, where General Luke Skywalker used one to cut an alien's arm off in a bar fight, a scene potentially inspired by a similar one in Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo. And while the plot of the movie changed significantly as the story evolved, this bar fight scene persisted almost unchanged throughout the film's entire development, except for a mention that the Jedi replaced his weapon in its sheath at the end of the fight, suggesting that Lucas might have envisioned these early laser swords as actually having physical blades. By the script's rough draft, though, laser swords are fully technological, with a 4-foot-long glowing blade igniting from a hilt resembling a small baton. Where color was mentioned in the scripts, early laser swords were also universally red, something that persisted up through the third draft. Ralph McQuarrie's concept art, which was primarily based on the second draft, deviated from the description of red blades and instead depicted them as white, with Deke Starkiller's weapon having a warmer hue and the weapons used by Darth Vader and the Stormtroopers having a cooler color temperature. And yeah, Stormtroopers used laser swords. Rather than just being reserved for Jedi and Sith, the early versions of Star Wars featured the weapons more commonly, with Stormtroopers in the second draft using them to avoid the ricochet of blaster bolts in a cramped starship. In the third draft, which finally changed the name of the weapon from laser sword to lightsaber, Luke already had his dad's weapon at the beginning of the film, and even the Tusken Raider that attacked him in the desert wielded one instead of a gaffy stick. And even when Luke finally received his father's weapon from Ben Kenobi in the fourth draft, it still wasn't the exclusive weapon of the Jedi, with Kenobi saying they were still widely used in some parts of the galaxy. And during my research, I actually came across an incredibly rare fifth draft of the script that was never filmed. Most of the movie is pretty similar, but the scene where Luke is training with his lightsaber aboard the Millennium Falcon is actually pretty different. And I've done a reconstruction of how the scene would have gone. Well, I suggest you try it again, Luke. But this time, let go your conscious self and act on instinct. Here, try this on. It's from this video's sponsor, Manta Sleep. But with the mask on, I'm experiencing 100% blackout. I can't even see. How am I supposed to fight? Your eyes can deceive you. Don't trust them, except when it comes to comfort. Well, you're right. The cups don't put any pressure on my eyelids, and what's this material? It's incredibly breathable. Well, of course it is. You don't think I'd spend 20 years sleeping in the desert without something that's properly ventilated, do you? How else do you explain how young and dashing I look? 20 years. Ben, where did you get this? Is this a relic of the Jedi? Did it belong to my father? No, Luke, I just clicked the link in the description and used the code Empire Records to get 10% off. Yes, it all makes so much sense. I just have one question. What's Darth Revan doing here? Oh, they're just waiting for the next video. But regardless of what was in the script, they still had to bring the weapons to life. An early version by costume designer John Mollo depicted Darth Vader's lightsaber hilt as a jewel-studded baton, and mechanical effects supervisor John Steers designed a number of hilts based on Ralph McQuarrie's concept art. George Lucas felt that Sears' prototypes looked too much like flashlights though, so set decorator Roger Christian went to a photography shop and found some old Graflex camera flash handles that he then modified with some extra bits and bobs and showed them to Lucas. Vader's weapon was also made from a camera flash, but Obi Wan's was cobbled together from a variety of parts to fit the used universe aesthetic the movie was developing. Those were still just the hilts, though. When it came to depicting the blades, the original plan was to try and get it as much in camera as possible. So wooden dowel rods were coated with retro-reflective tape that would make the blades appear to glow under the right lighting conditions. To give the blades a bit of flickering life, they were also motorized to spin, with a wire running up the actor's sleeve to a hidden battery pack. Unfortunately, because the reflective material bounced light directly back to its source, like a stop sign or a safety vest, the effect only worked when the light, the blade, and the camera were in very specific positions relative to one another. Eventually, the decision was made to just make the lightsabers glow via animation, with future Transformers the movie director Nelson Shin using a rotoscope to trace the blades frame by frame and add the flickery glow that brought the weapons to life. Post-production is also where different lightsaber colors were finally introduced. While some early tests for the weapons used red or green reflective material on the blades, the ones that they ended up using on set were white, and only in the finished film did we see a color dichotomy between the weapons used by Obi Wan and Luke, which were blue, and Darth Vader, who retained the red-bladed weapon from the early scripts. The finished movie also gave us the iconic sound of the lightsabers, which was created by Ben Burtt. Burtt, who is still a grad student at the University of Southern California, was also working as a projectionist there, and the noise of an idling film projector became the first layer of a lightsaber's sound. The second layer came from the buzz of a television picture tube, which was accidentally picked up by one of Burtt's broken microphones.
This is the projector motor hum. And then this is the sound of the picture tube. Okay. The blend of those two is...
With the look and the sound finally in place, the lightsabers became an iconic part of Star Wars popularity, but not everyone was immediately on the same page about them. The Marvel comics depicted the lightsabers with pinkish red blades like the scripts, and the original Ken or Luke Skywalker figure came with a yellow one. Only the novelization by Alan Dean Foster correctly identified Luke's lightsaber as blue, and expanded on John Mollo's early hilt design and mentioned that Luke's lightsaber had a number of unfamiliar jewel-like components built into the hilt, though they didn't seem to do anything special. In fact, the most astonishing part of the lightsaber to Luke was its power cell, which was the smallest he'd ever seen despite the amount of energy the weapon was using. His Star Wars sequel novel, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, also described Vader's weapon as having a blue blade. That book also gave Luke's lightsaber the ability to vary the size of its blade, with Luke adjusting it to emit a short, needle-thin spoke of energy that he used to unlock a door. The next connection between lightsabers and crystals was in the rough draft of The Empire Strikes Back, where a small crystal hidden in Luke's lightsaber acted as a memory cell that led him to a then unnamed bog planet. That idea was eventually abandoned, and lightsabers remained just fancy swords, albeit ones that were able to cut through flesh and metal with ease. And although Mark Hamill was much more spry than Alec Guinness, the choreography of the movie's lightsaber duel still relied more on slower, weighty strikes, as Hamill had been instructed by George Lucas to imagine the weapon as having so much energy behind it that he couldn't even take a hand off it. When Luke next appeared on screen in Return of the Jedi, he'd built a new lightsaber with a unique green blade, though that seems to have been a late decision. Early trailers, posters, and even the first run of Kenner's action figures assumed that Luke would be using a blue-bladed weapon. The decision may have been made to make Luke's lightsaber stand out more against the bright blue sky of Tatooine, but it also might have been to make it clear that he didn't just scrounge up Obi Wan's old weapon for himself. because that's what the production did. Rather than designing a new lightsaber for Luke, they just reused one of the weathered props wielded by Alec Guinness in the first film, and only constructed a pristine version to use in a handful of close-up shots, most of which didn't even end up in the movie. After the end of the trilogy, the Star Wars Marvel comics started to introduce different lightsaber variants into the early expanded universe, starting with the Light Whip, wielded by the Dark Force user Lumaya in 1985, and then a short-bladed lightsaber variant used by Luke to help him deal with Lumaya's weapon. But like with so many other concepts in Star Wars, it was the West End Games tabletop role-playing game that became the foundation of the broader lore for the weapon. In 1987's Star Wars Sourcebook, Luke's construction of a new lightsaber became a rite of passage that all Jedi went through as one of the final steps of their training. A novice would likely take a month of dedicated work to build one, but Jedi Masters during the Clone Wars were said to be able to construct them within 2 days. The construction of a lightsaber was also said to not require very many exotic materials, and while crystals were used to focus the energy of the weapon into a beam, there wasn't really anything special about them, and they could even be created synthetically in a furnace. Lightsabers with a single crystal had a fixed blade length, but they could include up to 3 to allow a Jedi to change the length of their blade by varying the distance between the crystals. The sourcebook also elaborated on the mention of the weapon's power cell in the novelization of Star Wars, saying that while lightsabers do eventually need to be recharged, they only really lose power when the blade comes into contact with something, so Jedi could go for years without recharging their weapons. And finally, the book provided an explanation for how a lightsaber's blade actually worked, describing it as arcing back on itself from a positively charged lens into a negatively charged aperture. This means that calling it a lightsaber is actually kind of inaccurate. In practice, it's really a chainsaw. Each lightsaber was also said to have a unique frequency, which determined the color and sound of the weapon and also influenced how it felt to handle. The idea of lightsabers being difficult to use was expanded on in the second edition of the RPG in 1992, which stated that a lightsaber was hard to wield because the blade was weightless, contradicting George Lucas's direction to the actors, but to be fair, that wasn't publicly known at the time. Also in 1992, the endnotes of the 4th issue of the Dark Empire comic miniseries made a lightsaber's focusing crystals a more important part of their makeup. Rather than just being a prism for energy to travel through, the book stated that the lightsabers used natural crystals that were themselves the source of the energy. Found only in the Adiga system, they spontaneously emitted bursts of light and energy, and more common gems were then used to focus that energy into a coherent beam. These Adigan crystals next showed up in 1993's Tales of the Jedi comics, and Adigan crystals became the standard name for lightsaber crystals until the second edition trade paperback of Dark Empire modified its own endnotes to call them Ilum crystals, with Adigan crystals being a colloquial term for the most common variety. Tales of the Jedi also introduced the first material that could actually resist lightsabers, Mandalorian iron, with the tomb of the Sith Lord Freeden Nad being constructed of the material to keep out would-be grave robbers. When the fallen Jedi Exar Kun attempted to breach the tomb's walls, he had to increase the power of his weapon to its full intensity to cut through it, a weapon that he would later modify to emit a second blade, introducing the double-bladed lightsaber to the Star Wars universe. Because lightsabers were so much more common in the Old Republic, other ways to repel them appeared in the comics as well, like a wooden staff imbued with the Force by a powerful Jedi, or ancient Sith swords that the Tales of the Jedi RPG supplement would explain had been alchemically enhanced. In the novels, 1994's Dark Apprentice was the next story to add a couple of important pieces to the lightsaber puzzle. In this book, Gantoris, one of Luke Skywalker's Jedi students, secretly built his own lightsaber with 3 crystals to have a blade of variable length. And when he found those crystals embedded in the walls of the Yavin Temple, they dropped right off, and Gantoris felt as if they were destined for him. And while a bond between a Jedi and their crystals would become a part of Star Wars lore down the line, in this story, the connection is implied to be the manipulation of a long-dead Sith ghost, so it's not exactly concrete just yet. The book does make the first explicit connection between a lightsaber's crystals and its color, though. Rather than being determined by the weapon's frequency, the violet blade of Gantoris' lightsaber is a composite of the pink, red, and blue crystals that he used to build it. Back in the comics, Tales of the Jedi provided a look at ancient lightsabers. 1996's Golden Age of the Sith storyline was set 5,000 years before the films, and featured primitive-looking lightsabers that had prominent crystals sticking out of their hilts, and were connected by a cable to an external battery pack, much like the early motorized lightsabers used on set during A New Hope. Also in 1996, the Young Jedi Knights novel Lightsabers followed the students at Luke Skywalker's Jedi Academy on Yavin 4 as they built their lightsabers, with particular attention paid to the crystals they used. Luke mentions in the book that the rare and powerful Kyber crystals were the most sought-after gems, but because he didn't have any on hand, the students would have to find crystals elsewhere. This was the first time that a Kyber crystal had been mentioned in relation to lightsabers, but it's not the first time the term has been used at all. Early drafts of A New Hope featured the Kyber crystal as an artifact that could increase a Jedi's power in the Force, and when that idea was abandoned, it was reused in Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and then mentioned again in this book. But the crystals Luke's students ended up using weren't really anything special. His niece Jaina was adept with technology, so she used the Force to help mold a synthetic purple crystal in a furnace, something that Luke himself was depicted as doing to build his green lightsaber in Shadows of the Empire. Jaina's brother Jason used a gem from the core of Yavin that he'd acquired in a previous adventure to make a green-bladed lightsaber, and their friend Lobaka, Chewie's nephew, scavenged a crystal from a projector system in the abandoned Rebel base, creating a lightsaber with a bronze blade. Tenel Ka, the daughter of a witch of Dathomir, found her crystal inside one of Yavin's volcanoes and made a weapon with a silvery blade that mirrored its hazy crystal. Tenel Ka also demonstrated what could happen if a Jedi failed to construct their lightsaber correctly, when her weapon shorted out during a training match, causing Jacen Solo to accidentally cut her arm off. Lightsaber colors back then were a bit of a free-for-all, since there were only a handful of examples to go by from the movies. The early Marvel comics hadn't been too concerned with matching the on-screen colors of the weapons, and Dark Empire's impressionistic style rendered most lightsabers as blue, except for Luke wielding a red one during his tenure with the Emperor, and the Tales of the Jedi comics generally stuck to green and blue, though yellow or purple blades appeared with certain characters as well. Red lightsabers also appeared here and there, and while they were sometimes given to bad guys, not all Sith or Dark Jedi had red-bladed weapons, as evidenced by 1997's Jedi Knight video game, and some heroic characters like Princess Leia used red-bladed lightsabers at certain points as well. Jedi Knight also gave characters lightsabers that matched their size, with the twins Gork and Pick using proportionally correct weapons instead of standard-sized blades. 1997's Lords of the Expanse RPG supplement then introduced a group of lightsaber wielders who were neither Jedi nor Sith, with the nobles of the Tapani sector. These nobles dueled each other using light foils, less powerful but still deadly imitations of the lightsabers wielded by ancient Jedi who once resided in the sector. After that, 1998's iJedi followed in the footsteps of Mandalorian iron and provided another material that was resistant to lightsabers, cortosis, an ore that was able to short out a lightsaber on contact and could be woven into fibers for the creation of lightsaber-resistant armor. The book also referred to the variable-length lightsaber used by Gantoris as a dual-phase blade, a term that has stuck around since. Also in 1998, the Star Wars Visual Dictionary by David West Reynolds provided the first glimpse of the inside of a lightsaber, with a model built by resident ILM sexpot Don Bees. The diagram pointed out the girth slider Luke had used in Splinter of the Mind's Eye to adjust his blade, and also said there was a similar one on Vader's hilt. In addition, the Visual Dictionary tried to reconcile the weighty depiction of lightsaber combat in the films with the weightless blades mentioned in the RPG, saying that the blade's electromagnetic field had a gyroscopic effect that made the weapon difficult to handle. That unwieldy depiction of lightsabers changed, though, in 1999 with the release of The Phantom Menace. Because the original trilogy only showed lightsaber battles between old men, injured cyborgs, and novice duelists, George Lucas wanted his new movie to depict the Jedi at their height, and so stunt coordinator Nick Gillard was allowed to choreograph the lightsaber duels as fluid, fast-moving chess matches between experts of their craft. And because Episode 1 was made more than a decade after the last Star Wars film, the prop makers no longer had to rely on scavenging parts or reusing leftovers, and the Phantom Menace's lightsabers were all custom machined. Ewan McGregor and Liam Neeson were even allowed to choose their own hilts from a variety of pre-made designs, and the rest were distributed to the other members of the Jedi Council. Even Yoda got a lightsaber, though it was built for the movie's Visual Dictionary rather than appearing in the film itself. The movie's villain, Darth Maul, had to fight a 2-on-1 battle against the Jedi, so he was given a double-bladed lightsaber to fend them off, bringing the weapon first used by Exar Kun to the screen for the first time. By now, the compositing for the weapons was being done digitally, and while the technique of rotoscoping was still used to trace the path of the blades, an actual rotoscope machine was no longer required. For the lightsaber colors, Episode 1 stuck to the established ones used in the original trilogy rather than tasting the rainbow of the expanded universe. Tie-in media for the film wouldn't be so restrained, though. Video games, comics, and action figures gave the other Jedi in the film yellow, purple, and even red-bladed weapons to go along with with the standard green and blue. In the expanded universe material not tied to the Phantom Menace, the New Jedi Order novel series introduced the Yuuzhan Vong, extragalactic aliens whose living armor and weapons could deflect lightsaber strikes. The Vong were also unable to be sensed in the Force, though Han Solo and Princess Leia's son Anakin was able to sense them telepathically after attuning a living crystal of Vong origin to himself and installing it into his lightsaber. Back in the prequel era, Darth Maul's weapon was elaborated on in the 2001 novel Darth Maul Shadowhunter. The book depicted the process the Sith Lord used to build his weapon, and mentioned that, while Adegan crystals were preferred by the Jedi, they had to be mined and carefully selected to ensure that they aligned correctly, to avoid damaging the weapon or its creator. The Sith, however, preferred to create synthetic crystals so that they could exert control over every part of the process. Not all Sith used lightsabers, though. 2001's Jedi vs. Sith comic miniseries depicted the Sith Lord Githany as using a light whip, though rather than the cat-o'-nine-tail style weapon Lumaya had used in the Marvel comics, Githany's light whip had a single, flexible whip-like blade. Also in 2001, the Jedi Apprentice novel series introduced training lightsabers, low-power versions of the weapons which were used by apprentices before they constructed their own. And although that construction process had now been shown a couple of times, the prequel version of it was first demonstrated in the Jedi Quest book Path to Truth, which showed Anakin Skywalker building his first lightsaber. But rather than traveling to the Adiga system to mine his crystals, the book brought Anakin to Ilum, which was now a planet, rather than just the name for the crystals. And rather than just stumbling across some crystals as the young Jedi Knights had done, Anakin experienced visions as he entered Ilum's crystal cave that tested his Jedi resolve. After passing the test, 3 crystals seemed to speak to him, and easily broke free of the rock inside the cave. After collecting his crystals, the building of Anakin's lightsaber was another psychological test as opposed to a mechanical one. When setting to work, the Padawan entered a meditative trance where he confronted a vision of Darth Maul and awakened holding a completed lightsaber that resembled the one he would eventually use as a Sith Lord. The expanded universe of the early 2000s also saw an explosion of Star Wars video games, with some of them having unique takes on lightsaber combat mechanics. 2001's Obi Wan used the right thumbstick of the Xbox controller to control the direction of the weapon's strikes, and 2002's Jedi Outcast created a robust combat system with 3 different combat stances and directional lightsaber controls that were based on the player character's movement. With both games having a heavy emphasis on lightsaber combat, they also revisited cortosis to resist the player's weapon, though they ignored the part about the orb being able to short out a Jedi's blade. Back on the big screen, Attack of the Clones featured hundreds of lightsaber-wielding Jedi, all of whom used weapons with green or blue blades, and hilts copied from the same batch of weapons built for Episode 1, except for Mace Windu, who replaced his generic blue-bladed lightsaber with a gold-plated hilt, or electrum, according to the movie's tie-in material, and a unique purple blade, at the request of Samuel L. Jackson, whose favorite color is purple and wanted to be able to spot himself on screen in the crowded Geonosis arena. The striking curved hilt of Count Dooku's lightsaber originated with art department assistant Roel Robles. To help the team come up with a unique design for the weapon, Robles brought his sword collection to work, and when Lucas came to review it, he selected a barong, a Filipino weapon with a curved hilt, to serve as the basis for Dooku's lightsaber. To explain why Dooku's blade was red, the tie-in visual dictionary said that he had replaced the original crystal in his lightsaber with a synthetic one in order to give the weapon greater power. The book also said that Dooku's curved hilt was an archaic design that was once used by the practitioners of the ancient Form 2 lightsaber style, though the book didn't go into much detail about what that actually meant. On the production side of things, Nick Gillard was working to make sure that the personality of each character came through in their fighting style. Anakin's inner aggression came out during combat, while Obi-Wan was much more by the book, and Mace Windu was efficient and lethal, using as little energy as possible to dispatch his enemies. Attack of the Clones also saw Yoda wielding a lightsaber for the first time, using the hilt originally created for Episode 1's visual dictionary. Though that was a pretty late decision, according to Nick Gillard, who learned on the day he got to set that George Lucas had decided that Yoda would fight too. The lightsabers also looked different in Attack of the Clones. While the tools ILM was using were mostly the same, Episode 1's lightsabers were kind of a free-for-all and done on a shot-by-shot basis. But the hundreds of blades seen in Episode 2 needed something more streamlined, so ILM created a lightsaber bible that resulted in a more consistent look across all the weapons, but one that didn't necessarily match how they looked in the previous movie. One bit of additional flair was the addition of lens flares when the weapons activated. The film also pioneered interactive on-set lighting for lightsabers. While earlier movies had included fights in dark environments, the lightsabers had never actually acted as light sources in those environments. But a brief moment between Anakin and Count Dooku plunged the actors into darkness, providing an excuse to experiment with props that threw red and blue light onto their faces. However, these early illuminated prop blades didn't seem to be very sturdy, so there's not much more choreography in this sequence than just the actors waving a couple of glow sticks around. The movie's choreography, or lack thereof, was then given a lore expansion in the October 2002 issue of Star Wars Insider magazine by the Fight Saber article by Visual Dictionary author David West Reynolds, which elaborated on the lightsaber combat forms he'd already mentioned in the Visual Dictionary. The article also elaborated on the mention of Count Dooku swapping his big natural lightsaber crystals for a pair of more powerful Sith bolt-ons. See, red crystals weren't traditionally used by the Jedi because they were more unstable than other colors, but their harmony with the dark side allowed them to produce stronger blades, and they could even break the blade of an opponent in rare cases, something that has never actually been depicted anywhere. But because he was worried it might happen during Ben Kenobi's duel with Darth Vader aboard the Death Star, the Jedi even adjusted his lightsaber to use a slow materialization setting that would give his blade more stability, and provide an in-universe explanation for the less than stellar optical effects that occasionally made it look like his weapon wasn't working properly. The big thing the article did, though, was to fully describe the 7 different forms of lightsaber combat, with each one being inspired by the characters from the films, and each one having a specific purpose extrapolated from their use in the movies. Form 1 was what they had the kids practicing, and was said to have been based on traditional sword combat, adapted for the eccentricities of the lightsaber as a weapon. Because Count Dooku's weapon had a curved rapier-like hilt and he was easily able to go toe-to-toe with 3 different Jedi, Form 2 was made his signature style, and said to have been devised by ancient Jedi specifically for the purposes of lightsaber dueling. Inspired by Darth Vader's inability to defeat Ben Kenobi on the Death Star, Form 3 used light, efficient movements, the kind that could be performed by 62-year-old Alec Guinness, to create an unbreakable defense. In-universe, the form was designed to allow Jedi to defend themselves against blaster-wielding enemies. Form 4 was the agile and acrobatic style used by Qui-Gon and Obi Wan in Episode 1, as well as Yoda in Attack of the Clones. After the form failed Qui-Gon during his fight against Darth Maul, Obi Wan abandoned it to focus on the more defensive, by-the-book, Form 3 in Attack of the Clones. Anakin's aggression in Episode 2 and the heavy, powerful strikes featured in the original trilogy inspired the offense-focused Form 5, and Form 6 combined elements from each of the others, though at a less strenuous level than mastering any individual style. Form 6 was also the most common lightsaber style used by the Jedi during the prequels, and because those Jedi weren't as practiced at lightsaber combat as the ones who'd studied a specific form, most of them died in the Geonosis arena. The 7th form of lightsaber combat was the most recent and was still being developed during the prequel era because its practitioners needed to master the other 6 before tackling the 7th. Mace Windu was one of the few users of the form during the prequels, though Darth Maul also used a variant of it in Episode 1. Unlike the other forms, the 7th utilized a deep well of emotion that brought its user to the edge of the dark side. Form 7 would also be the first to get a name, with Matthew Stover's Mace Windu-centric novel Shatterpoint saying that some Jedi students had started calling it Vapod, after a creature from the Galactic Battlegrounds video game. Windu's use of this darkness-edging form also spurred fan speculation that his purple lightsaber, which was a mix of red and blue, might be a hint that he's closer to the dark side than people might realize. But lightsaber colors were largely meaningless at that point, and there wasn't any significance given to them until 2003's Knights of the Old Republic video game. The game was based on the tabletop RPG rules from Wizards of the Coast, which divided Jedi into 2 classes: the Jedi Guardian, which focused on lightsaber combat, and the Jedi Consular, which focused more on use of the Force. KOTOR added a 3rd class, the Jedi Sentinel, which was a middle ground between the other 2 and had a stronger focus on the game's non-Force-based skills. Which class the player chose determined which color of lightsaber crystal they received, with Guardians using blue like Anakin Skywalker and Obi Wan Kenobi, Consulars using green like Yoda and Qui-Gon, and Sentinels, like the game's new character Bastila Shan, using yellow. Purple lightsabers were rarer in the game, but were used by Jedi and Sith alike. Because of the game's focus on Jedi and their weapons, the developers needed a way to balance the combat against non-Force sensitive enemies. And due to the large numbers of Jedi and Sith running around the setting, they decided that cortosis-laced vibroblades would be incredibly common in this era. Though, like the cortosis of Jedi Outcast and Obi Wan, the vibroblades of KOTOR only blocked lightsabers rather than disabling them. And while the game did allow players to use short or double-bladed lightsabers, the turn-based combat didn't really make any of the weapons feel much different to use. Jedi Academy released the same year, filled the void of real-time lightsaber combat and greatly expanded on the groundwork laid by its predecessor, Jedi Outcast. Jedi Academy was also the first game to allow the player to choose their own custom lightsaber hilt in addition to its color. But even though stories set in the Old or New Republic eras gave Jedi a wide variety of lightsabers to use, most things set during the prequels stuck to the green or blue colors established in Attack of the Clones. 2003's Clone Wars microseries set two standards for lightsaber construction moving forward. The first was reducing the number of crystals that could be used in a lightsaber. Now, only one gem powered a Jedi's weapon. The cartoon also set the precedent for Jedi building their lightsabers telekinetically. Meditation and focus had been required for lightsaber construction for a while by this point, but it was still a manual task. And because most lightsaber construction happened in books, that was fine. But depicting the process on screen required something more visually dynamic, so a hands-free approach became more common. And despite the more restricted lightsabers of the Clone Wars setting, there were a few interesting variants that did sneak through. Severance Tan, the Chiss acolyte of Count Dooku from the Clone Campaign's expansion to Galactic Battlegrounds, wielded a yellow-bladed lightsaber, and a forked crossguard lightsaber made an appearance in an issue of the Star Wars Republic comic series. The Clone Wars microseries also introduced Asajj Ventress, a character based on unused Sith concept art from Attack of the Clones, who wielded a pair of lightsabers that not only had curved hilts and not only could be joined together into a double-bladed weapon, but could also be connected by a cable to become a pair of lightsaber nunchucks. During this time, other media also began to pick up the 7 forms of lightsaber combat, with Knights of the Old Republic 2 giving each form a name in addition to their number. And while Shatterpoint had stated that Mace Windu created the 7th form, KOTOR 2 included it anyway, calling it Juyo, and retconning Vapad into a variant of a pre-existing form rather than something Windu made up himself. But despite lightsaber combat forms becoming more prominent after their initial debut, a 2004 newsletter from StarWars.com revealed that the movie's production used a much different way to categorize each Jedi's skill with the lightsaber. According to Nick Gillard, George Lucas worked with a system of skill levels, with each level influencing a Jedi's combat style. In Episode 1, Obi Wan was at level 6 or 7, but had moved up to level 8 by the time of Revenge of the Sith. Anakin had reached level 9 at that point, putting him on par with Yoda and Darth Sidious, with the dark side giving him an additional boost. Gillard also gave a particular Jedi's lineage of training a lot of influence in how they fought. The characters whose training descends from Yoda all share common traits, but Mace Windu, who learned from different masters, is more unique. As the Clone Wars period of the expanded universe counted down to the release of Revenge of the Sith, fans got glimpses of a new lightsaber-wielding character, General Grievous, who was created for the upcoming film but made his debut in the Clone Wars microseries as a notably non-force-powered but still highly skilled lightsaber wielder. The second season of the cartoon showed off his ability to use 4 lightsabers at once, and also introduced his bodyguards, who used electrostaffs that were resistant to lightsabers in combat. The early intent for these weapons was to have them protected against lightsaber strikes by being covered in electrical energy, but eventually the decision was made to confine the energy just to the ends, turning them into spicy Q-tips. The Episode 3 lead-in novel, Labyrinth of Evil, explained that electrostaffs were actually made of an alloy called Frick, which was used for the armor of the Dark Troopers in the Dark Forces video game, and now had their durability expanded to include resistance to lightsabers. The movie itself gave us several lightsaber battles, with the kink-prone aluminum rods used in the previous movies now replaced by more durable carbon fiber blades, and rubber stunt hilts now able to be chrome-plated. And while most of the movie's battles featured existing weapons, including Grievous's digital sabers which reused lightsaber hilts that ILM had already built, Palpatine was shown wielding a lightsaber on screen for the first time. And while in the film he uses a unique hilt designed by ILM model maker Tony Drew, originally the weapon was only supposed to appear in his fight against Yoda. As originally filmed, Palpatine actually used Anakin's lightsaber in his battle against Mace Windu, since Anakin was present for the entire fight, and the weapon can still be seen in Ian McDiarmid's hands in the movie. The Palpatine action figure released in 2005 also came with Anakin's weapon, which most fans assumed at the time was an error. The choreography of that fight also changed significantly on the day of filming. Nick Gillard had choreographed the duel with the assumption that Palpatine would be portrayed by a stunt double, whose face would be digitally replaced by Ian McDiarmid's, as had been done with Count Dooku and Christopher Lee. But George Lucas wanted to shoot the fight with close-ups to see the emotion on the characters' faces, and hadn't learned until the morning of filming that McDiarmid hadn't practiced the fight. So McDiarmid, Jackson, and Gillard had to work quickly to come up with some choreography that could be learned on short notice for the close-ups. After the release of Episode 3, the feature film side of Star Wars seemed to be complete, which meant that it was time for the expanded universe to start doing some cleanup. Late 2005 saw the release of the new Essential Chronology, which detailed the full history of the Star Wars universe and set the emergence of lightsabers around 15,500 years before the films, describing the early blades as energy-hungry and prone to overheating, so they were mostly reserved for ceremonial purposes. 2007's Jedi vs. Sith, The Essential Guide to the Force, elaborated on these early lightsabers, saying that they used experimental technology to freeze blaster bolts for their blades, suggesting that the earliest lightsabers may not have used crystals at all. At the other end of the timeline, the Star Wars Legacy comics, set more than 130 years after the films, introduced the Imperial Knights, a group of Jedi-adjacent Force users who served a new galactic empire and wielded identical silver-bladed lightsabers that were created using synthetic crystals. In 2008, the video game The Force Unleashed allowed the player to collect a variety of lightsaber crystals for their weapon, with a variety of colors and blade effects, including the brand new black lightsaber crystal, which produced a black blade surrounded by a bright white glow. The game also featured several lightsaber variants for the game's enemies to wield, like Maris Brood's lightsaber tonfas or the lightsaber pikes used by the Empire's Shadow Guards. 2008 was also the year that Star Wars returned to the big screen with the theatrical debut of the Clone Wars television show. Over the course of its run, the show spiced up the fairly basic prequel lightsaber menu, with some of the more common colors getting different hue variations for specific characters and the new Jedi Temple guards wielding folding, yellow, double-bladed lightsaber pikes. The Dark Saber, a black-bladed lightsaber used by the Mandalorian Pre Vizsla, was created when George Lucas vetoed the idea of having the character fight Obi Wan with a regular vibro sword, since a lightsaber should be able to cut through most other weapons. The Dark Saber was also unique in that its blade had a more traditional sword shape than other lightsabers, and additional effects to make it more visually interesting than the black tube from The Force Unleashed. In Season 5, the show featured a story arc about a group of Jedi younglings going to Ilum to collect their lightsaber crystals, which the show referred to as Kyber crystals, resurrecting once again the crystal from the early drafts of A New Hope. And because the arc was about younglings getting access to lightsabers for the first time, the child-sized sabers featured in Attack of the Clones were replaced in the show by wooden training sticks. Similar to the depiction from Path to Truth, The Gathering was a test of skill and spirit, and each Jedi was drawn to a particular crystal that they would have to face their own weaknesses to reach. However, rather than remaining on Ilum to construct their weapons in a meditative trance, the younglings in the show built their weapons aboard a starship assisted by the droid Huyang, who had been helping Jedi build their weapons since the days of the Old Republic. And speaking of, the Old Republic MMO featured lightsabers in spades. Since its launch in 2011, the game has included a huge amount of cosmetic options for lightsabers, from hilt designs to colors to additional effects to modify the look of the blade. For Jedi and Sith characters, obtaining their first lightsaber was a major moment in the story, and prior to that they used electrified training weapons that were more robust than the simple sticks used in the Clone Wars. The Jedi Knight character builds their lightsaber in the traditional way, but the two Sith character classes receive a lightsaber that already exists. The warrior gets it by looting a Sith tomb, and the Inquisitor receives it as a gift from their master. The Jedi Consular puts their crystal into the hilt of the first blade, the first lightsaber, which was created by an ancient Jedi master more than 25,000 years before the events of the films. But despite being older than the extension cord lightsabers from Tales of the Jedi and even the ancient and unwieldy frozen blaster lightsabers from the reference books, this weapon looks identical to the more modern lightsaber built by the Jedi Knight. In the Old Republic, changing the color of a lightsaber required swapping out the crystal, but the 2011 novel Riptide introduced a new and very influential way to do it. In that book, former Jedi Academy protagonist Jaden Korr used the Force to cleanse the red lightsaber crystal of a dark Jedi, first turning it clear and then attuning it to himself, which changed the color to yellow. In 2012, more prototype lightsabers were seen in the Dawn of the Jedi comic series, which took place nearly 26,000 years before the movies, making it the earliest story set in the Legends continuity. In Dawn of the Jedi, the original founders of the Jedi Order used metal swords, but the Rakatan Infinite Empire, an ancient, technologically advanced society, had developed Force sabers, precursors to lightsabers that channeled the dark side of the Force through black crystals to create blades of energy. 2012 was also when George Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney, and in order to provide a clean slate for the upcoming sequel trilogy and other new stories, the existing expanded universe was discarded, including decades of lore about lightsabers. The Clone Wars cartoon, which was overseen by Lucas, was the only piece of the expanded Star Wars universe which remained canonical. And that canon also included episodes that didn't even get finished, like an arc revolving around a giant Kyber crystal that the Separatists were seeking to use as a weapon. The crystal ended up being destroyed, which was ultimately for the best, as Yoda speculated that it was sought by the Sith to create a super weapon like the Kyber-powered devices used during ancient wars between Jedi and Sith. Yoda's speculation was eventually confirmed in 2014's Star Wars Wars Rebels, which featured the Empire seeking out kyber crystals to use in the Death Star's super laser, recontextualizing the weapon as essentially a giant lightsaber. The show also had a few other lightsaber-related developments, like Ezra Bridger's first weapon, which included a stun gun feature, or the spinning lightsabers wielded by the Imperial Inquisitors, and Ahsoka Tano's white-bladed weapons. The actual blades in the show were also designed to look like the thin lightsabers from Ralph McQuarrie's original concept art, rather than the Clone Wars depiction, which more closely resembled the weapons featured in Revenge of the Sith. As Episode 7 began to approach, Lucasfilm started pumping out new Star Wars merchandise to lube us up for the new movie. That included new reference books that could have started the universe over from scratch, but instead chose to carry over most of their information from what was now called the Legends continuity. Through books like Star Wars, Absolutely Everything You Need to Know, additional elements like the 7 forms of lightsaber combat were slowly reintroduced to canon. Another mainstay of Star Wars world building, tabletop role-playing games, also helped to contribute to the new continuity. The Star Wars role-playing game by Fantasy Flight Games began in 2012, starting at the tail end of the Legends continuity and later releasing books firmly aligned with the Disney canon. This jump in continuity meant that some things from Legends, like Cortosis, appeared here first before showing up in any canonical stories. The Force and Destiny portion of the game, which focuses on Jedi and other Force users, reintroduced the older lore about ancient, bulky lightsabers and also broadened the variety of crystals and lightsaber types available to Force users. Somehow, the Skywalker lightsaber returned when Episode 7 finally hit theaters, and it was countered by an iconic new weapon, the First Order Riot Baton, which followed in the footsteps of Episode 3's electrostaffs by using electricity to counter a lightsaber's blade. And for some reason, they kept using the girth slider to turn the Skywalker lightsaber on rather than the big square activation plate on the hilt. Oh yeah, the movie also had a new kind of lightsaber wielded by the film's villain, Kylo Ren, one with a jagged, unstable blade and a crossguard design that instantly became a major part of the new Star Wars landscape. The idea came from Johnny Ive, then Senior Vice President of Design at Apple. During a conversation with director J.J. Abrams, he suggested that the villain's lightsaber might be more ominous if it were less precise and more primitive looking than other lightsabers. The idea for the crossguards came from the illustrated lens flare on the original Star Wars poster, meaning J.J. Abrams literally figuratively built a lens flare right into Kylo Ren's lightsaber. During the film's development, the art department also came up with a few images of lightsabers that didn't end up making it in, such as a double-bladed red and blue weapon and explorations of extremely primitive lightsabers which used a trigger crystal to spark the blade from a large chunk of kyber. Concept artists Ryan Church and James Klein also debated whether or not lightsabers should actually cast light on the environment around them. Klein thought that not throwing any light gave them a more magical quality, but when it came time to actually film the movie, the production used illuminated LED blades as standard equipment for the first time, including during the fights. And I kinda have a problem with the way these blades were handled. When LEDs emit light of a specific color, like blue, they're emitting light of only that color. So when that blue light hits something, only blue light bounces off into the camera, which can look really ugly when the natural color of something is lost and replaced with a single oversaturated, blown out hue. But if you use a white light with a filter, like a gel, you get that interactive blue light, but enough of the rest of the visible spectrum sneaks through to allow more detail from the object's natural color, which is probably what Attack of the Clones did, because the kind of LED technology they use in lightsabers today wasn't available when they were filming the movie in 2000. These new illuminated props also changed how it feels to fight with a lightsaber, as attested by Ewan McGregor, who picked one up again for the Obi Wan Kenobi Disney Plus series. According to him, the flexibility of the illuminated blades provided too much give compared to the aluminum and carbon fiber weapons the prequels used, and that definitely makes sense. If your partner's blade isn't actually going to stop yours, you kind of have to pull your punches, which can make the fights feel less real on screen. New technology also influenced the back end of the lightsaber pipeline. Rather than two-dimensional rotoscoping, live-action Disney lightsabers are tracked in 3D to ensure the blades have proper perspective and motion blur, which also includes dimming the blades to replicate actual photography of fast-moving lights. And as usual, the new movie's visual dictionary provided more insight into the weapons shown on screen, with Kylo's unstable blade being caused by a cracked kyber crystal, which also required the weapon to vent excess energy through quillons, based on an ancient lightsaber design used thousands of years earlier. Those ancient crossguard lightsabers then began to appear in other places like Star Wars Rebels, the tabletop RPG, and the Old Republic, which made crossguard lightsabers one of the first elements of the current canon to be backported into the Legends continuity. The 2016 Ahsoka novel then provided more insight into how and why she'd gotten the white lightsabers that she had in Rebels. The book explained that in the new continuity, red lightsabers wielded by Inquisitors or Sith weren't naturally colored crystals or synthetic gems made in a furnace, but were stolen crystals that were corrupted by their dark side wielders, who bled the red color into them. The book also reiterated that each crystal had a chosen bearer, and after Ahsoka encountered an Inquisitor who had obtained crystals meant for her, she defeated him and took them, purifying the crystals into their clear, natural state. The novel also referred to kyber crystals as active participants in their relationship with the Jedi, something that was followed up on in the Rogue One prequel novel, Catalyst. During Galen Erso's study of kyber for the Death Star project, he came to the conclusion that the crystals were as close to being alive as any rocks could be, with an internal structure that seemed to be a bridge between organic and inorganic, and the crystals resisting his attempts to study or modify them. The book also discussed other non-lightsaber uses for kyber crystals, with stories like the Ahsoka novel doubling down on the cosmic link between kyber crystals and their destined wielders. There had to be more reason for them to be important beyond just being crammed into a flashlight. As Catalyst explained, ancient societies revered kyber for its nearly eternal durability or associated the crystals with primal elements, while the Jedi saw them as an embodiment of the Force. So, rather than the late Legends lore about crystal-based lightsabers replacing earlier blaster-based attempts at laser swords, the new canon pointed to the crystals coming first, and lightsabers being an expression of the Jedi's pre-existing relationship with them. This was demonstrated in the non-canonical LEGO Star Wars series The Freemaker Adventures, which featured the Kyber saber, a new instance of the first lightsaber, which had a physical blade forged from kyber crystals, though the weapon was destroyed after its creator realized its destructive power. When Rogue One was released, it actually became the first place to confirm in live action that lightsabers had anything to do with crystals at all. While that might not seem like a big deal, for casual viewers who only watch the movies, this is the first time any explanation had been given for how lightsabers actually work. And it's not even presented as the primary use, since the plot importance of kyber has more to do with the Death Star in the film. After Rogue One, in the third season of Rebels, we got yet another explanation for why lightsabers were difficult to use. Rather than a weightless blade or gyroscopic forces, the new explanation was more mystical. While training with the Darksaber, the Mandalorian Sabine Wren was told that using a lightsaber is less about swinging a sword than directing a current of power, and that the wielder's thoughts and actions are a part of that power, flowing through the crystal to become a part of the blade. It also turns out that lightsaber blades are drawn to each other and have to be pulled apart, giving an in-universe justification for choreography where duelists seem to be aiming for their opponent's weapon rather than their body, or extended saber lock sequences that allow characters to pause the action for a dramatic face-to-face conversation. Our first look at bleeding a lightsaber crystal came in 2017, in the pages of the Darth Vader comic series, which featured Vader contending with his own inner turmoil in order to bend the lightsaber crystal of a dead Jedi to his will. Later in 2017, The Last Jedi featured the First Order's Praetorian Guard, who fought against Rey and Kylo Ren and so needed to wield a variety of energy-laced weapons that could plausibly stand up against lightsabers. The movie also followed up Rogue One's inclusion of kyber by actually showing the crystal inside a lightsaber for the first time in live action, which was preceded by showing what happens when a lightsaber is torn apart by the Force. The movie also toned down the saturation of Rey's prop lightsaber in this movie, using a color that was closer to a cool white, which helped to make the interactive lighting actually look nice instead of cheap. Thanks, Ryan. Around the same time The Last Jedi released, the Secrets of the Empire VR experience opened, with an adventure revolving around the quest for a weapon hidden in the Empire's vaults, which turned out to be an ancient prototype lightsaber. But because the VR experience was only open in 3 locations and closed in 2020, there isn't actually any footage of the weapon out there. But Star Wars Explained played through the experience and commissioned an artist to draw the lightsaber based on his description, which was a sword with physical blades energized by a kyber crystal in the hilt, similar to the real lightsaber progenitors from Edmund Hamilton's story all the way back in 1933. In 2019, video game players were able to step into the shoes of a Jedi once again with Jedi Fallen Order. During the course of the game, Cal Kestis loses access to his master's lightsaber and travels to Ilum to create a new one, with the game confirming an earlier implication that the planet would eventually be used as the site of the First Order's Starkiller base. After Cal collects his crystal, it splits in 2, which he treats as an unrecoverable failure until he realizes he can just make 2 lightsabers and connect them together for a double-bladed weapon. At this point, the game also gave the players a chance to choose from several different lightsaber colors, including some that hadn't yet appeared outside of the Legends continuity. The game also had a fairly robust hilt customization system, with many of its lightsaber parts being digital replicas of the pieces available to participants of the lightsaber building workshop at Disney's newly opened Galaxy's Edge. Batuu, the setting of the theme park, was intended to be a canonical part of the Star Wars universe and includes Savi's workshop, where guests can build lightsabers out of salvaged parts gathered by local Force adherents. As the sequel trilogy came to a close, The Rise of Skywalker ended with Rey wielding a new lightsaber of her own, built from pieces of her quarterstaff and emitting a yellow blade. Perhaps a deep-cut reference to Luke's original yellow-bladed Kenner lightsaber, but more likely just something to establish her as the start of something new, rather than the continuation of the old order. And you're right, yellow-bladed lightsabers had already been used by the Jedi Temple Guards, but the sequel trilogy was made for casual moviegoers, not fans with diseased minds like us. And those Temple Guard lightsabers were featured not long after Episode 9 in Marvel's Star Wars comic series in 2020, with Luke Skywalker using one and finally becoming toy-accurate prior to building the weapon he'd use in Return of the Jedi. After the sequels, the next big project for the Star Wars universe was the High Republic publishing initiative, which told stories in the centuries leading up to the films. The initial concept art for the era featured lightsabers in a variety of colors and styles, and while some of the more diverse ideas didn't make the cut, yellow and purple lightsabers were still seen more commonly in this era, with the young Jedi Ventress wielding a purple blade that could be modified to act as a light whip. Outside the High Republic stories, the Jedi Temple Challenge show saw real kids taking the role of Jedi Padawans, engaging in some light obstacle course work to earn their promotion to Jedi Knight, which included installing gifted lightsaber crystals into pre-built hilts rather than going through the gathering ritual. And with the show's host character, Kelleran Beck, becoming fully integrated into the Star Wars universe via The Mandalorian, I guess that means the show presents a glossy version of a Jedi diploma mill, where masterless Padawans are hurried through their trials so they can be thrown into the Clone Wars meat grinder to command an army of boymen. 2020's Dark Legends short story collection gave us another non-standard shape for a lightsaber blade, with a Sith who used a sickle-shaped lightsaber, and 2021's Star Wars Visions showed off several new, if not canonical, lightsaber variants, as well as other kyber-powered weapons and even a kyber crystal being used to allow a droid to access the Force. One of the Vision stories, The Ninth Jedi, featured a sabersmith who was able to temper the kyber crystals of his weapons so that they would reflect the user's connection to the Force. An untrained wielder would produce a dim, desaturated blade, and a lightsaber in the hands of a Darksider would produce a red one. 2020 also saw the return of the Clone Wars, with the show's 7th season having Ahsoka reclaim the lightsabers that she'd lost access to after leaving the Jedi Order, though Anakin Skywalker had modified them to emit blue blades, incorporating the color-shifting attunement that was introduced all the way back in Riptide. Post-sequel live-action Star Wars continued to feature the Darksaber, and resurrected Mandalorian iron, or Beskar, as a material that could successfully repel its blade. The weapon also gave these shows a reason to reiterate the information about lightsaber handling that was featured in Rebels. When the Mandalorian Din Djarin came into possession of the Darksaber, he found it difficult to use, and it became heavier with each swing because he wasn't fully in tune with it. The 2023 Ahsoka show brought orange lightsabers to the screen for the first time, used by the Dark Jedi Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati. Despite being villains in the show, they were given orange weapons to suggest that they may have more complicated allegiances or motivations than your standard baddies, and the not quite red color suggests that they didn't get their weapons by bleeding their crystals. The show also provided another look at lightsaber training, with holographic lightsabers being used in conjunction with wooden training swords. That year also saw Fallen Order get a sequel with Jedi Survivor, which allowed players to add a heavy crossguard lightsaber stance to their repertoire, with Cal Kestis using a weapon that could switch between several different modes on the fly. This also seems to sneakily add dual-phase lightsabers back into canon, since Cal's lightsaber has multiple crystals, and the crossguard configuration gives the weapon a longer blade. The game also depicted its villain bleeding his lightsaber crystal, bringing that process one step closer to being shown in live action, which actually happened in The Acolyte in 2024. And unlike the previous depictions showing only a kyber crystal being bled on its own, the show depicted what happens when an activated lightsaber has its crystal corrupted. The show also included the purple and yellow lightsabers that were common in other High Republic stories, and brought Vernestra Row's light whip to live action as well. The show's villain had a unique lightsaber too, with his weapon being able to split in two, giving him the ability to wield a second smaller blade in his offhand. In one of the show's climactic action sequences, the Stranger also displayed the effectiveness of cortosis in combat, with his helmet and gauntlet finally accurately depicting the Or's ability to short out a lightsaber blade. In 2026, we have the return of The Ninth Jedi, which hasn't aired at the time of writing, but will be out when you're seeing this in the future. Based on the trailer for the series, the show is continuing the user-specific treatment of lightsabers from Visions, and is also introducing a massive new kyber-powered weapon. And that's where things stand now. If we look back at the whole decades-long history of the lightsaber, two things seem really apparent. The first is that the movies didn't really contribute that much. They, of course, created the look and the sound and the function, but everything else came later and was decided by authors who had nothing to do with the original films and started out as fans just like the rest of us. Seeing light whips and cortosis and kyber bleeding in a big-budget live-action Star Wars show is the result of decades of world-building and compounded storytelling that the universe's creator never could have intended or foreseen. And that leads into the second thing that becomes obvious in retrospect, that the fans made lightsabers what they are today. They evolved from being mundane to divine because we started treating them with more reverence. They were elegant weapons, sure, but even the early expansions of the lore in the RPG only considered them to be mechanically complicated rather than spiritually meaningful. But as Star Wars became more and more mythologized by fans, its props became sacred relics. And as fans became authors, they rewrote the universe to agree. This isn't unique to lightsabers, it's not even unique to Star Wars. Every franchise with a large and venerable enough fan base is gonna do this. The Joker was once just a guy, the Enterprise was once just a ship, and the lightsaber was once just a sword. But fan is short for fanatic, and ascribing deep cosmic significance to an old camera flash handle with some shit glued to it is definitely fanatical behavior. Though, at least we picked something cool to make into a living embodiment of God. Imagine the torturous world we'd be living in now if we kept seeing ice cream makers everywhere.